Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching Samvaad with your host Kriti Mishra. During the period of 2014 to 2022, the Indian economy underwent a gamut of wide-ranging structural and governance reforms that fortified the economy's fundamentals by enhancing its overall efficiency. The Economic Survey 2022-23 presented in Parliament today by the Finance Minister stated that the emphasis on improving the ease of living and doing business. These reforms were based on the broad principles of creating public goods, adopting trust-based governance, co-partnering with the private sector for development and improving agricultural productivity. And joining us today on the program is the main architect of this year's Economic Survey, Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran. Sir, welcome to Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, before we get into the specifics, let's set the tone and tenor of this interview with the highlights of the survey from the author himself. Over to you, sir.
No, I mean, the highlights of this survey are several. In fact, we begin with the fact that we are focused quite a bit on the medium-term outlook because we consider the current economic recovery from the pandemic to be complete, which is what the GDP data for 21-22 and 22-23 tell us. And we have given a pride of place to the social sector initiatives because for the government, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas is an important philosophy because economic prosperity in and of itself is not enough unless it leads to inclusive growth. And we call that chapter a big tent because the government's social welfare measures in the last 8 years or so cover many different segments of the society and many different aspects of the economy, from education, infrastructure, to cooking gas, to health, and to ease of living, better tax administration. So multiple initiatives have been taken by the government to support people in their day-to-day living, and that occupies a pride of place in the economic survey. The other thing we have done is we have dispensed with the second volume because the other volume of individual thought essays can be pursued under different platforms and umbrellas. And the purpose of the economic survey is to provide an assessment of where the economy stands today and what are its prospects. There is also enough interesting number of boxes, and we have created something called economic survey highlights, which I understand has not been done before, sharing with the readers all information, both interesting and useful, in a simple, concise form. And lastly, of course, all the data that are presented in the economic survey in the form of charts or tables or statistical appendix will be put in the Excel file format for people to be able to download and use them in their own work as well. I consider these things as the important highlights of the economic survey.
All right, sir, let's deconstruct it further and let's talk about economic growth. Now, the survey is optimistic that India will continue to grow at a healthy rate in the medium term, led by consumption and capital expenditure. But, sir, in the short to medium term, the widening current account deficit for an extended period is a concern that could probably have an implication on growth and even depreciation of the rupee as well, sir. Your thoughts on that?
No, the current account deficit did go up in the second quarter of the current financial year. That's simply because of higher oil prices. But since then, concerns about current account deficit have ebbed. And in the new financial year, 23-24, the Reserve Bank of India does not expect the current account to be a source of concern because the general expectation is that global commodity prices will decline meaningfully or stay low, because they have declined quite a bit already in the current financial year. So we do not expect current account levels or their financing to pose challenges as they appeared to in the course of 22-23. Now, rupee depreciation also was more noise than substance because the Indian rupee actually performed far better than several other currencies in the world against the US dollar. It was more a story of dollar strength than rupee weakness in the current financial year, especially between April and December. And in fact, in the new calendar year 2023, in the first month in January, the rupee has actually performed well and even strengthened slightly against the US dollar. So rupee depreciation and current account deficit should not pose headaches to the Reserve Bank of India or the government in the course of 23-24, and that's our view.
All right, sir. There was something very specific on inflation also, wherein the survey said that the management of inflation in India has been particularly noteworthy in contrast with advanced economies. Now, two clarifications, sir. How did India brave the global inflation post-storm, the Ukraine and Russia war? And secondly, the geopolitical uncertainties, particularly around oil prices, do they worry you as well, sir?
What is the second part of your question?
Sir, the political uncertainties.
No, the first part of the question, I heard you well about the inflation. India managed to obviously do a better job than many other countries in terms of capping the inflation peak at about 7.8%, only about 1.8% higher than the upper end of its inflation target range. And that was due to two or three reasons. One is that India did not stimulate its economy excessively as several other countries did during the pandemic years. And then what it did was to also intervene quite decisively in the markets to reduce excise duties and customs duties on petroleum products, to also create incentives for import of edible oil, unprocessed edible oil, by lowering the import duty so that processed edible oils could be sold at a lower price to end consumers, and also undertook several supply measures to ensure adequate availability in local markets, even imposing export restrictions on select commodities. These were all the measures taken by the government apart from prudent fiscal and monetary stimulus in the pandemic years. And the third contribution to inflation management, of course, came from the central bank. Reserve Bank of India has an inflation target and ensured that it quickly ended its accommodative stance and pivoted to withdrawal of accommodation in April 2022 and continued with it all the way until the end of the year decisively. And the fact that Reserve Bank of India also did not engage in excessive monetary stimulus during the pandemic years contributed to the inflation acceleration slowing at some point at 7.8%, peaking there and coming down to 5.7% by December. So basically, it has been prudent fiscal and monetary management in the pandemic years and decisive measures taken by the government to ensure supply, to manage price rises by lowering duties, and the central bank by ensuring that it raised interest rates and shrunk liquidity to eliminate second round effects of the inflation pass-through. These all contributed to India's inflation being managed in a far more efficient manner than elsewhere.
All right, sir, from inflation, let's also talk about employment. Now, the survey mentions that enhanced employment generation seen in the declining urban unemployment rate and in the faster net registration in Employee Provident Fund. But, sir, the layoffs that we are seeing are a serious cause of concern.
Well, I mean, in general, the layoffs are part of the economic cycle that formal employment sectors go through. Last year, we had, last 2 years, there were a lot of boom in hiring in the information technology sector. And in general, formal employment in listed companies has picked up quite well in the last several years, and the growth rate has been healthy. So these kinds of cyclical fluctuations will happen. The headlines do, of course, convey a disproportionate sense of concern, but these will pass once the demand outlook for IT companies' businesses pick up as well. What is important to us is to ensure that private sector investment picks up in the coming years, and in turn leading to employment generation. And also much depends on the construction sector recovery. We are very pleased to see signs of residential real estate market turning for the better, and buyers are coming back. That will also lead to employment generation. And then also we should not forget that employment is not the only means of creating livelihood these days. The startup culture has really picked up and diffused in the country. From just about 400 odd startups, now we had 80,000 plus startups in the country. And startups, it is not just about getting employment. Our youth is now encouraged to think of generating and providing employment to others. And that is the entrepreneurial culture as well. It's a solution to the income and livelihood challenge.
Sir, that's absolutely true that we've been talking about being a job giver and not being a job seeker. But the economic survey has called for simpler tax rules and processes to help Indian-owned startups in reverse flipping or shifting their base back to India. What could be the roadmap ahead?
There are tax policy changes and also many legal and compliance disclosure requirements, etc., that are being addressed and looked into by the government to encourage reverse flipping.
Okay, all right, sir. You also talked about the private sector. Now, the survey says that subdued demand in 2023 could surpass and also suppress global trade and impact several countries, including India. The survey also says that governments can try to open markets through FTAs. But to take advantage of that, it is in the hands of the private sector or the participants. But, sir, do you think more needs to be done for improving export-linked growth?
Well, I think export growth was very strong in 21-22, and in 22-23 so far, naturally in the last quarter especially, merchandise exports have slowed down, but services sector exports are doing well. In fact, overall combined 9 months of 22-23, April to December, combined export of goods and services is growing at 16% compared to the previous 9 months in April to December 2021. So yes, free trade agreements definitely are one route to open markets, especially in the medium term, and because they provide the first foothold for Indian exporters into foreign markets. The second is to enhance export competitiveness. That is what National Logistics Policy and PM Gati Shakti aim to do, to reduce last mile connectivity costs for exporters, and also the creation of physical infrastructure. The number of seaports, the number of airports that have all been expanded also provide efficient transportation options for exporters, and not to leave out, of course, simplification of processes for exporters. All these things are government initiatives, but also from the private sector side, one needs to focus on quality, cost competitiveness, innovations in design, research and development investment need to happen. And also government's PLI schemes themselves is a very big initiative to enhance India's export growth, because India sees an opportunity in plugging itself into the global supply chain by creating incentives for many domestic and foreign manufacturers to come and set up shop in India to manufacture and export to the rest of the world. And I think that in time will be also playing a very big role in boosting our merchandise exports.
Absolutely, sir. And I completely understand that you have a very busy schedule, very hectic one. So I'll pose my last question to you. We've all been talking about Amrit Kal and, of course, Atmanirbhar Bharat, path to self-reliance. Your closing thoughts.
Sorry, what's your question, please?
So I said path to self-reliance, your closing thoughts, sir.
On the policy priorities for the Amrit Kal, apart from the Atmanirbhar Bharat pursuit, because global supply chains are being reconfigured, and we are looking at, if not deglobalization, some partial rollback of the globalization that we experienced in the last 40 years. So that is an important aspect, and that is why increasing the share of manufacturing in Indian GDP is going to be an important priority, and reaching a share of about 25% of GDP will be a great achievement in the Amrit Kal period. Then, in order to achieve that, we need two important ingredients. One is affordable, reliable power supply, but not at the cost of viability for power producers and power distributors. The second important ingredient of that is an educated, knowledgeable, and skilled youth, especially in terms of the demands coming in the 21st century. The expansion of the MSME sectors into viable medium enterprises, if not, because we have too many micro enterprises.
Okay.
And in order for the MSME sector to grow, we need to undertake administrative reforms, enforce contracts, and also dismantle licensing, inspection, and compliance ecosystem across all levels of government. We have to ensure that Indian energy security is maintained and we are able to diversify from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels, renewable energy. And last, definitely not the least, India needs to harness Nari Shakti. And that is the way to go forward because ultimately women in management and leadership positions have shown themselves to be far more stable and efficient decision makers than men have in different crisis situations. Therefore, all possible avenues have to be explored to ensure that there are options for women not to have to choose between career and home, but to be able to enjoy both to enjoy what both options have to offer to them, and whatever the state can do it must do. So these are all the various important policy priorities for the Amrit Kal period.
Absolutely, San. Thank you so much for giving us that perspective. All the
You're
very
welcome.
best for tomorrow, for the budget as well. And we'll continue coming back to you. Thank you so much for talking to Sansad TV, sir.
You're welcome.
Well, viewers, that's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Goodbye for now from my side.